Thank you very much. Now, all of my thinking about this has been paid for by the European Commission, so I thank them for the grant to think about this and many other things about organoids. Before starting, I should probably tell you that the only reason I stand here, or one of the reasons maybe, is that I'm allergic to rats. If I had not become allergic to rats, I would probably be an experimental neurophysiologist. But starting to wake up at 2 o'clock at night and not being able to breathe is no one's idea of fun, so I ended up as a bioethicist. Now, the kind of neural organoids I'm going to talk about are 3D models of parts of the central nervous system. We produce these essentially to direct the differentiation of stem cells, and we can produce various neural organoids, and we can induce them to connect. So you could produce a retinal organoid and get it to connect to a cortical organoid in what is called an assembloid. Now, currently, there are some severe restrictions on how large these can be, because they do not have any blood vessels, and therefore all the oxygen has to come from the outside. So essentially, as they grow, they will eventually reach the limit where the center will start to die because it doesn't get oxygen. So that's a current technical limit to how big these can be. Now, the issue I'm going to focus on, and I will say from the start that this is going to be a deflationary talk, can neural organoids develop sentience or conscious, and what would that mean? How should we think about them? And I think the answer to the first question is probably yes. Or if it's not yes, it's at least that we can't be certain that it's no. We can't be certain that we could never produce a neural organoid which would have some kind of sentience or phenomenological consciousness. So we do need to think about, well, what would we do if we came to a stage where it was likely that a neural organoid. So I'm going to make a series of observations about neural organoids. The first one is the very simple ones that because of the technical restrictions, current neural organoids and assembloids are small, and they are of relatively simple structure compared to even the simplest mammalian brain. Now, this is a coronal slice of a mouse brain. And of course, if you zoomed in on the various parts, you would see that every part of this has a very specific structure. Even the smallest brains, for which we know the cell number, where someone has taken the effort to try to actually count how many cells there are. The smallest one I could find a number for is for the naked mole rat, which has about 6.2 million neurons and 8.4 million glia of various kinds in its brain. So even the simplest mammalian brain is quite complex and quite significantly larger than any neural organoid we can currently produce. The second observation is that despite the fact that we can get neural organoids to do things, we have to remind ourselves that the fact that they can do things is not the same as their sentience and or conscious. So in 2022, there was this studies showing this is actually not a neural organoid, it's just a two-dimensional neural network. You can get this network to play Pong, a very early video game. And the researcher developing this said that they had developed the first sentient lab-grown brain in a dish. And that's simply not the case. They haven't developed a brain. If it's sentient, it is in the very minimal sense that the thermostat on my radiator at home is sentient. And interestingly enough, if you then go and look at the paper in detail, you will find that mouse, they did this with human cells and with mouse cells, and the human cells outperform the mouse cells with nuances on average. So a mouse network can also play Pong. And if you are not convinced, sort of by just my claim that computational ability is not the same as sentience and consciousness, then I think you should take your mobile phone out of your pockets and look at it and think, this can do many things. It can do things that are much more advanced than playing Pong. Do I think this thing has consciousness? Now, if you don't think this, then you should be convinced that this neural network probably did not have consciousness either. We also have sort of a quite serious philosophical problem, which I won't belabor, and that is that we actually do not know still how the human brain produces the phenomenological consciousness that we have. There are a large number of theories about how this goes on and how we should measure it, but there's actually no agreement on it yet. And for those who are interested in these things, of course, will know that Chalmers, I think last year, won a bet that he had made with someone else 25 years ago. And the bet was about would science have discovered how consciousness was actually produced by the brain. Chalmers had said no, and he won a case of wine on the bet. Now there's a further problem which sort of affects the ethical literature on this. And this is that there is a risk of equivocation on the term human. And the equivocation is that these organoids are definitely made of human cells. And in that sense, if they have a consciousness, it is a human consciousness. But it is very, very unlikely that the consciousness of a human organoid will be a phenomenological similar consciousness to the human. And there are at least three reasons why this is very unlikely. First of all, it's unlikely that even if we can grow a very complex organoid which has consciousness, that it actually structurally replicates the human brain in all details. The organoid is also going to have a different embodiment. And irrespective of what kind of philosopher you are, you will know that in the continental tradition, Maurice Merleau-Ponty has written extensively about the role of the body in shaping our consciousness. Damasio has done the same from a neuroscience point of view, and of course there are many others putting forward these arguments that in a very significant sense, the way we perceive the world and think about the world is shaped by the very particular embodiment we have as human beings. And an organoid is definitely not going to have that embodiment. It will have an embodiment, but not that one. And finally, there's a Wittgensteinian point that the organoid that develops consciousness will develop it in a different life world than the world you and I inhabit. As Wittgenstein said in Philosophical Investigations, if a lion could speak, we could not understand him. And the reason being that the lion lives in a quite different world than we do. So even if we accept that organoids, neural organoids grown from human cells, at some point could become conscious, they're going to have a different consciousness than we have. My fifth observation is that we already interact with sentience and conscious neural organs. So thinking about organoids and consciousness and organoids has a very close analog, and that is animals. Animals have brains. A lot of us think that animals definitely have sentience. We're sort of, at least most of us, not very impressed by Descartes' view that they're only machines, and when they look like they're in pain, they're not really in pain. Most of us probably also think that at least some animals have something which is close to the kind of consciousness we have. And of course, we regulate the use of all of these things. And as we get to know more about animal consciousness, we, well, at least sense regulations, so that in the UK, but now it is because we have come to think that cephalopods probably have sentience and may have consciousness. So what does all of this mean for regulation and bioethics? Well, and I'm more than happy to add to the literature on these questions. But it doesn't follow that there's anything we need to do now, because they are very, very unlikely to become sentient or conscious in the near future, and even in the midterm future. And if and when sort of consciousness arises as a realistic possibility on the horizon, then the animal experimentation and not human research settings, because whatever consciousness these neural organoids will have, it is a consciousness which is, in a very literal sense, alien to ours. And finally, acknowledgement to all the partners of the European project, and especially Jonathan Lewis, who I have discussed this with extensively. Thank you.